Alright, gang, here we go with Unit 3, the Reformation. This is a short unit in terms of how many days we spend on it, but a lot of information, so let's get to it. Alright, the Reformation is basically about the Catholic Church. For a long time, centuries, really dominated European thought, action. They were the main power in Europe. Okay, over time, they had some problems, so a lot of people started to question the church and rebel against them, which is what we're talking about here. So Protestant, protest. There you go. All right, challenging the church's authority. The first problem for the church was usury. Usury is charging interest on loans that allow the person or group loaning the money to become richer. Merchants challenged the church's view of usury. Basically, they thought, you shouldn't be telling us how to run our businesses. Church said charging more than 10% on a loan is unnecessary and greedy. Also believe that there should be no interest charged to the needy. So if you're charging a loan to a poor person, that's not a good thing. Some Christians believed usury was a sin. German and English nobility, like the rich people, if you will, disliked Italian domination of the church. They thought the church showed favoritism towards Italy because Italy was the closest country, because the Catholic Church was centered on the Italian peninsula. The church's great political power and wealth caused conflict. Kings could not rule without church approval, and the church had enormous wealth and kings did not. So basically, the kings were jealous of the church's wealth and power, and they wanted that for themselves. The church was also facing corruption. Priests not tending to their churches, gambling, drunkenness, fancy dress, meaning clothes that were expensive, breaking the vow of celibacy. Basically, these guys had lost their way, lost why they had become priests. They weren't serving the Lord, if you will. They were serving themselves. And then the next was indulgences. People were freed from their sins if they paid the church. People did not have to confess their sins, but simply pay the church. So it's kind of like buying your way into heaven. Not cool. Key figures of the Reformation: 2 early dissenters. And a dissenter is one who protests or objects. Think Rosa Parks. Think Martin Luther King Jr., people like that. First was John Wycliffe. He believed the church was very much full of sin, and church leaders should give up their property and live in poverty. So, hey, get back to, Jesus was a poor guy, he wasn't rich, and look what he did. Jan Hus was considered the first reformer. He spoke out against indulgences, and because he was warned by the church several times to stop, he did not. The church burned him at the stake, which is, you can see here in these artists' interpretations of that event. A couple key guys here. The first was Martin Luther. His views: salvation by faith alone. Only believing can save your soul, not buying indulgences and things like that. Bible is the ultimate authority, not the church and the clergy. So the Bible has more weight than what your priest says. All humans are equal before God. No pope, bishop, or priest is superior to man. And you should read the Bible for yourself, which was a problem since quite a few people in Europe at this time could not read, which was improving, but slowly. His actions: he posted the 95 Theses, which was a list of what the church was doing wrong and ideas for improvement, and he nailed it to a church door in Germany. So Martin Luther was German. And he also led to the birth of the Protestant church, which is a new denomination, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in class. Next we have, there's Martin Luther, protesting, speaking out. Next we have John Calvin. John Calvin, his views: predestination. God has decided who will be saved and who will not. You cannot change your fate. So when you're born, God decides you're going to heaven, you're going to hell. Regardless of what you do in your life, you can't change it. But he did say faith is revealed by living a righteous life and having a good work ethic. And hard work was essential to his views. So even though you're not sure where you're going, you should still live a good life and work hard. His actions expanded the Protestant movement to other parts of Europe and started a Protestant sect in Switzerland which you can see here. Here's France. Switzerland's over in here. Swiss Confederation, very tiny. Remember, Europe at this time is very much not like Europe now. A lot of things were not unified back then. Next, we have King Henry VIII. Excuse me. One of the pretty interesting guys in history, all of history. King Henry was originally a Catholic. He wanted his marriage canceled or annulled after his wife of 20 years could not give him an heir to his throne. So his wife couldn't give him a child. He wanted a child because when he died, he wanted to keep that power in the family. The Pope refused. Henry, in a bold move, dismissed the authority of the Pope in Rome. He declared the church had no further power in England. He got a divorce, started his own national church in England, and he appropriated property and wealth of the Roman Catholic Church in England for his own church. So in a nutshell, long story short, Henry wanted a divorce from his wife because his wife couldn't give him a kid. Pope said no. He said, forget the Pope, forget the church. I'm going to start my own church and give myself a divorce. That's what he did. And Henry was very interesting. Married 5 times. When he finally did have a son, he was very sickly, very weak, wasn't very healthy, and he died. His son died at a very young age. And, oh, by the way, he had 2 of his wives executed. And that takes us to Queen Elizabeth I. And she was the daughter of Henry VIII. Remember, Henry wanted a son. He wanted a king, a prince that would be king. Elizabeth I was raised a Protestant. She did not care what people believed as long as they kept their beliefs to themselves. She was tolerant of Catholics, but hoped they would eventually become Protestant. And she established the Anglican Church. And her rivalry with Spain led to an expansion in colonialism in the New World, which we'll talk about later. And she did have a victory over the Spanish Armada in 1588. And basically, when they fought Spain in the Anglo-Spanish conflict, a lot of it was over wealth and power, but it was also about Catholics versus Protestants. And so that was a big victory for England and Queen Elizabeth I at this time. All right. Questions, summary, get those done. Remember your key points. Why was the church being challenged? And the dissenting views and motivations of Luther, Calvin, and Henry. Remember, Luther and Calvin, that says Calvin, I just noticed that, sorry, wanted to change the church for the better. They were good Christian men trying to improve the church, whereas Henry obviously had his own motivations, selfish reasons for disagreeing with the Pope and the Catholic Church. So finish those things up. I will be checking these on next block, and I will see you then.